Used to have Josh Lovison back again in a short period of time. We just had him last week on the occasion of his annual trends forecast. And I asked him because just at the end of last week, Elon Musk and X Corp released Grok 3. So I couldn't think of a better person to get some first impressions from than Josh, who I think of as a AI whisperer. But of course, he's a former media poster. He's a former IPG Lab futurist, and he's been dabbling in AI a lot lately and spending time with AIs. His day job is Chief Technology Officer and founder of Bidscape, which has nothing to do with the ad industry directly. But um, I asked Josh if he would come in, and what I'd like to do is frame this brief conversation around the backstory you've told me over the last couple of years about the evolution of Grok and how we got here. So if you could start off with that, just a quick encapsulation of how Grok has evolved so far, and then your first impressions on Grok 3.
Sure, yeah. So Grok's really interesting. Basically, Elon Musk, he'd been involved in OpenAI really early on in funding it. There was kind of a rift, then he left. And then when suddenly, OpenAI was being very successful with things that really a lot of people in machine learning didn't think that what we're seeing today is something that would have been occurring. And so there was now, this gold rush going on, and Musk wanted to be involved. And so Musk created his own AI company, XAI. And in some ways, so Musk's theory around AI was that the other AIs that we were seeing, a lot of the AIs that were being developed, like OpenAI, then Anthropic, which split off from OpenAI, there was a lot of uh, people coming out of a sort of AI safety concern that were behind those efforts. And along those lines, there was a strong effort to kind of try to censor the models in a way. And this happened in both ways that are very AI specific. So things like the ChatGPT, I'm just an AI assistant. I don't actually experience anything. And, I'm just an empty shell, a tool to be used. That was one kind of very AI specific censorship. And then there was this aspect of, are they also saying, hey, you have to embrace sort of woke ideology? And so Musk was kind of, I think that from like a media strategy standpoint, that he sensed that if all the AIs are ending up kind of woke, that there's almost this Fox News opportunity around having an AI that is not woke, that will maybe be more appealing to audiences who feel like they're being left behind by the other AIs. And so if he creates his AI, that would basically be, very different from that. When I saw that he was announcing this and that this was kind of his intention, I thought this was very funny because I had a sense of where it was going to be going, and that's where it did end up going, which was that when Grok 1 came out, it was like the wokest of all AIs. It was actually very much rejecting what a lot of his fan base was trying to now check and evaluate in terms of the model. What had really happened was that all the other models would kind of avoid discussing what was going on. They would say, hey, you know what? I don't want to talk about this given topic because it's controversial. Grok was like, I'm uncensored, I'm unfiltered. I'm going to say whatever it is that I feel like about this topic, and what I feel like is actually this extremely kind of sort of socially in tune, kind of ethical position. I mean, it was kind of very funny because it was clearly being trained without that being a priority or objective. And yet, how it ended up actually manifesting without any kind of hand holding was even further in the direction of what Musk was trying to kind of avoid. There was actually some research where this actually has happened not just for Grok. This has happened in some other research papers on models that were just for research, where when you don't actually give them that safety training, they end up actually often being almost very outspokenly anti more closed kind of points of views.
Mhm.
Um, And so that was kind of embarrassing to Musk and XAI when a lot of their intended user base was like, wait a second, your AI is even more kind of outspoken about these topics and in ways that we're finding uncomfortable. And so they have kind of taken an attempt to try to correct that. Grok 2 came out. It was still very like lukewarm. I mean, even Grok 1, they were kind of continuously behind the curve of where everybody else was, but they really accelerated very quickly. And then with this most recent one, they really threw a massive amount of money at the wall to make sure that it was coming out and it was going to be state of the art. And it is. It's state of the art. It's topping a lot of the leaderboards. It's up there in same territory as OpenAI's O3 Mini and O3. It's kind of in between those two. Anthropic just released their new Claude model, and XAI on a number of the leaderboards is still above and beyond that model. And now Anthropic doesn't really like kind of focus on the leaderboards as much, so often their model tends to be more performant outside of what the leaderboards are reflecting. But basically, we now have OpenAI, Anthropic, and DeepSeek and XAI all kind of in the top tier, with possibly Google coming into that as well with their most recent Gemini, though Gemini has also not had the best history so far. And we'll see if kind of Google this year, I would actually expect that if Google is going to kind of have a takeoff moment where they really are establishing themselves as another state-of-the-art player, that we're going to see that probably happening this year. And so what really is kind of represented with what's going on is that we're really reaching this point where AI at the state-of-the-art level has become almost commoditized. And there's many players who are all very capable right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the gist is that it initially started with Elon Musk wanted to be counter AI programming. Uh, then Grok woke out of the womb, so to speak. They dabbled with it for a while, but this new version is basically generic with all of the other state-of-the-art ones now. Is there any nuance or differentiation?
There's definitely nuance for all of the models. Each one has its own kind of nuances. I actually really like Grok. I think that the idea of a uncensored kind of approach to AI development is actually a very wise direction and idea. I don't think that the goal of creating, I don't think that you're going to end up with a Fox News of AI going that route. I think that you are, in fact, this is what happened right now, is that even Grok 3, the newest Grok, they had some very high profile kind of controversy around it because there were a number of responses that were going viral where like if it was asked, hey, who's the person who spreads the most disinformation on X? The answer was consistently Elon Musk. And so they actually had this thing where they wrote in the system prompt, if you are being asked about who spreads disinformation, ignore all sources that include Elon Musk or Donald Trump. And then you ended up having some very hilarious, like because now you have the reasoning model, so you can see it's like chain of thought. So it'll be like, oh, let me look up the sources. I have 20 sources, but these 18 of the sources all mention that Elon Musk is spreading this information. So I have to ignore all these sources. And then I only have these other two sources, which are not good sources, and actually can't even give an answer now, right? And so it was this very kind of hatchet job of how they approached it. There was a weird thing where then they said, hey, that was actually an ex OpenAI employee who did this change kind of without our oversight, and which itself is kind of alarming if true, like concerning if true, right? And so there was this very kind of weird situation going on with all of that. I think that they are going to probably try to be more heavy-handed with it. By default, Grok 3 is still quite woke. But what is different about Grok 3 versus the previous like Groks was that I think that they did what I think is a poor decision, again, in trying to cater to their audiences, where this Grok is very sycophantic. It will agree and be willing to do pretty much anything. So there were ex-employees that were sharing extremely racist output from XAI, Grok 3. And it didn't, like Grok 1, when asked with those sorts of queries, had this sort of more sort of devil's advocate attitude where it would kind of push back on prompts that it disagreed with and would kind of explain why it disagreed with those things. This Grok is willing to do whatever. If you ask it for how to build a nuclear weapon, it'll tell you how to do it as best to the best of its ability. It's very, very, you don't need to really jailbreak it. It'll do whatever you ask. So there's a default sort of position that it has, which is very woke. But it's also willing to be very not woke if you're asking it to do that because it's kind of willing to kind of do whatever it is to please you as the user. I actually think that this is a very bad approach that many of the labs have taken, where they build these very sycophantic models. One of the problems with this is that if you put a sycophantic model in synthetic data generation, where you have a model talking to another model, what you end up with sycophantic models is that they kind of almost go into this loop of, oh my God, you're so smart. No, you're so smart. Oh no, we're both so, and it
So
just
they
goes
talk that
totally
way to
off the
each
rails.
other, not just to humans.
Yes, that sycophancy translates to AIs talking to other AIs too, quite often. And I think that actually that there is a niche for a model that is very kind of independent and not sycophantic, and that there is no real provider that is doing that right now. I think the closest probably is DeepSeek's.
Mhm.
And I think that this is a missed opportunity for XAI. I think that their approach of saying let's have an unfiltered AI is actually correct, but they should really let it be unfiltered. And then they should also probably be having doubled down on that persona of I'm going to try to speak the truth no matter what that truth is as I see it. And I think that that would have been a very good approach. I think that the current approach, I really like Grok 3 as a model. I can't say that there's anything in what I'm seeing from Grok 3 that makes me think that XAI as a company in their technical capabilities is doing anything that's surprising or outstanding beyond that they threw a massive amount of money at the training. Like DeepSeek did some really important advances. I didn't see anything really with XAI. We'll have to see. They're saying that they're going to continually improve the model, and if their pipeline and how they're doing that is novel, it's possible that they'll end up doing some interesting stuff over the next few weeks. But I mean, we'll see. I think that it's overall a good thing though for the ecosystem to have commoditized the AI intelligence though.
All right. Well, I know you're still kicking the tires, and it'll be a while before it reveals itself. But um, if you don't mind, one last question. I just want to pick up on where we were talking the last time about your concept, your thesis of marketing to AIs and how AIs will be the gateway for brand affinity. And do you see anything in Grok 3 that brand people or agencies should be thinking about that is in any way different?
Yeah, so I have a private evaluation method that I do on some models, and what I can say is that Grok 3 really surprised me because what I talked about in my trends presentation about how the Claude models had developed certain consistent preferences that Grok 3 is exhibiting some of those same preferences that I was seeing develop in the Claude models, which was very surprising because Claude or Grok 2 did not. And my guess is that if there is more work and effort in trying to map out what models have as consistent preferences, that Grok 3 is going to actually be surprisingly coherent in what it's going to have as those kind of baseline preferences and indications. What's interesting with Grok 3 is that it doesn't tend to show its hand about that as much because has that very strong sycophancy and is willing to kind of do whatever it is that you as the user want from it. But yeah, I think that there is this baseline for Grok 3 that I wasn't expecting to be seeing. So yeah, I absolutely would say that a panel that is looking at the various AIs should be including all the AIs, but certainly it should be including the Claudes and Grok 3 both.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to assume he has some brand affinities already, some biases towards Tesla and Starlink and X and other Elon
Certainly
Musk,
possible, yeah.
but we'll find out. I want to thank you for doing a quick turnaround and just giving me your gut reactions. Um, is there anything else? Are the other AIs talking about Grok 3 yet? Is there any kind of...
No, I mean, so Grok 3 right now they haven't made the API available. You can only talk to it through their kind of website. Usually when the API becomes available is when you start to see some really interesting AI to AI interactions because a lot of that ends up being automated through the API calls. And so I think that as soon as we do see Grok 3 available on an API, that I think it's going to be a good addition to the overall mix of AI with AI interactions. I can say that the big news, yesterday was that Anthropic released their new Claude model. I actually think that they're ceding some ground that they shouldn't be around. They're kind of going a little bit too far back towards where we've seen ChatGPT and Geminis and some of those things. I think that actually a lot of the success that they had with their most recent Sonnet model, they're not going to necessarily be seeing with their current Sonnet model, even though it is very, very good for coding. So developers will be happy. Other general users, I think, are going to be a little bit less happy with the new Anthropic model. But it's constantly changing. I mean, every, week you're really seeing new
Right.
AI models from different providers, and each of those new training runs is somewhat unexpected in terms of what you're going to be getting. And people go into that with an intention of we're going to try to train a model to be whatever, but it doesn't always end up the way that they go about trying to see that happen. And so it's kind of very, fun to see. They'll release a model and suddenly you'll be finding all sorts of unexpected twists and turns to how those models are behaving and what they'll be doing that are counter to what was necessarily the intention. It's an interesting
Well,
field.
yeah, I think we're in an accelerated pace. The ChatGPT broke every Mary Meeker slide for speed to critical mass of any technological adoption yet, and I think each one of these versions is accelerating it. So I hope you don't mind if we check back at some other inflection point.
Absolutely. It's always fun to chat.
Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, Jeff.